This video will examine the use of the Visualizer tool. The Visualizer is one of the set of developer tools provided by NetKernel. It examines root requests processed by NetKernel. We're going to start actually first by clearing the cache, and you'll see why in just a minute. And we'll go back to the Visualizer. The Visualizer captures quite a bit of information and is off by default. That's why we need to click the Start button to tell it to start capturing request information. If you want to further refine the requests that are captured, you can enter a regular expression in this edit box, and that will be used to match against the identifier of the root request. So if there is a match, then the Visualizer will capture that trace. So let's go ahead and start. And now we're going to switch over to the request panel that you saw from the first demo. And we're going to request this resource twice. Once, twice, and now we'll go back to the Visualizer and stop it. And you can see here are the two requests. So what you see is the identifier for the request that came in. This is the root request. So it's HTTP localhost tutorial first module hello world, which is exactly what we entered in the browser. To explore in the Visualizer, you click on this, and at the first level it shows you a complete trace from the HTTP transport down to the bridge overlay. And here is the dynamic import. This is where our new module is imported into the fulcrum. And if you remember from the last tutorial, actually I'll switch over to the editor and show you. Let's bring up the module. So here's the module from our tutorial, and here's the starting root space right here. Notice that there's a file set that mounts the simple dynamic import hook, and here is a mapper that we're going to see in just a second in the trace, which has an endpoint that with a grammar matching the URL that we sent in, and it in turn sends out a request for the Groovy runtime and provides the program that is going to be run to handle our request. So let's go back to the Visualizer, and notice here's the mapper, here's the Groovy runtime, and the Groovy runtime is issuing a request for the program, and that gets resolved to the file set that we saw. And the Groovy runtime is actually, if you click on this, you can see this detail. The Groovy runtime is asking for the representation to be a compiled Groovy rep. And the file set doesn't know anything about that. It's just returning a readable binary stream. So the kernel steps in and says, well, there's a mismatch, so on behalf of the runtime, it issues a transrep request, which is resolved by the Groovy compiler. So the Groovy compiler then issues a request for the resource, gets it back, it compiles it, and notice here's the compiled Groovy rep, returns it back to the Groovy runtime. Now the output of the Groovy runtime, we can take a look at that here. This is the string that's emitted by the program, and that's the same that we see in the browser. That's the hello world from first module tutorial. And that form is a string, but that needs to be turned into a stream to be sent back to the browser. So we'll notice down here a string serializer. We can collapse these to make it even more clear. The string serializer is used to convert the string into a stream so that it can be sent back to the browser. So we can see all of this detail in the Visualizer. So you can see that the Visualizer captures quite a bit of information. In fact, it's all the processing information that the kernel sees. So if you look at a particular endpoint, you can see all the details about the request. You can see how the resolution occurred. You can see all the different places it tried to resolve, what it actually matched against, the physical endpoint, and details about the endpoint. And you can see in the response area information such as the type that was returned, the expiration information, the cost to compute, and so on. Next, let's go back to the top level and let's take a look at the second request that we made for this resource. And here you'll notice that there's hardly any processing going on at all. And in fact, the readable binary stream is coming from cache, which illustrates the value of the caching in NetKernel. So the visualizer is an incredibly powerful tool. It'll allow you to see every detail of each request that's being handled by NetKernel. And if you get stuck, if for some reason you're looking at a trace and you don't quite understand it, you can use the save feature, and it will zip up all the information about the trace, save it in a file, and you can send it off to support to get some additional help. That concludes the introduction to the visualizer.